The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust as Margaret O'Sullivan stepped down from the rickety stagecoach, her worn leather boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of red rocks and scrub brush painted against an impossibly blue sky. At 29, she had already buried one husband and lost everything twice over, but the crumpled deed in her coat pocket promised a new beginning, or at least a roof over her head. "You sure about this, ma'am?" called the driver, a grizzled man with tobacco stains in his beard. "That ranch ain't been lived in for nigh on 3 years. Previous owner got himself killed by bandits, they say." Margaret adjusted her faded green dress and squared her shoulders. Her auburn hair, pinned back severely, caught the late afternoon sun. "I'm sure," she replied, her Irish accent still thick despite 5 years in America. $12 was all I had left, and $12 was what they wanted for it. The stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her alone with a single carpet bag and the distant silhouette of her new home. The ranch house sat like a weathered bone against the landscape, its adobe walls cracked but still standing. A windmill creaked lazily in the breeze, and somewhere a loose shutter banged with irregular rhythm. Margaret walked the quarter-mile to the house, her heart hammering with each step. The closer she got, the more she could see the years of neglect, broken fence posts, a collapsed section of the barn roof, weeds choking what had once been a vegetable garden. But the well still had water, she noticed with relief, and the main structure appeared sound. She climbed the 3 wooden steps to the front door, noting how they sagged under her weight. The door itself hung slightly ajar, weathered wood swollen from desert storms. Margaret pushed it open and stepped inside, expecting emptiness. Instead, she found herself facing 3 pairs of dark eyes. 3 Apache men sat around her kitchen table as if they owned the place. The youngest, perhaps 28, had shoulder-length black hair and wore a mix of traditional Apache clothing and white man's pants. The oldest, maybe 31, bore the scars of many battles across his chest and arms, visible beneath an open leather vest. The third, around 30, carried himself with quiet dignity, his hair braided with small bones and feathers. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They simply watched her with the patience of men who had been expecting this moment. Margaret's hand flew to her throat, but she didn't scream. 5 years on the frontier had taught her that panic was more dangerous than stillness. I have the deed," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my land now." The scarred warrior, the one who radiated authority, spoke first. His English was careful but clear. "We know of your paper, white woman. We have been waiting." "Waiting?" Margaret's grip tightened on her carpet bag. "For what?" "For you to come," said the youngest, rising smoothly to his feet. He was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "I am Swift Eagle. This is Stone Bear," he gestured to the scarred man, "and Running Wolf." He nodded toward the third man, who had remained silent. Running Wolf finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "We have proposal for you, Margaret O'Sullivan." She started at hearing her name. "How do you—" "We know many things," Stone Bear interrupted, standing as well. The room suddenly felt very small with all 3 men on their feet. "We know you are widow. We know you have no money, no family, no protection. We know this land is dangerous for woman alone." Margaret's Irish temper flared despite her fear. "And I suppose you're here to remedy that situation? Out of the goodness of your hearts?" Swift Eagle smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "Not goodness, no. Necessity. We need this land too. Government wants to move our people again, but we are tired of moving. This place," he gestured around the modest room, "it sits between reservation and town. It is useful place." "So you want to share it?" Margaret asked, confusion replacing some of her fear. "Share, yes," Running Wolf said, moving to stand by the window. "But not just land. Apache way. When warriors need strong alliance, they take wives from other tribes. Makes bond that cannot be broken." The meaning hit her like a physical blow. Margaret set down her carpet bag with deliberate care. "You want me to marry one of you?" "One of us, yes," Stone Bear confirmed. "We help you build ranch, protect you from dangers, teach you ways to survive here. In return, you choose husband from among us. Alliance benefits all. And if I refuse?" The 3 men exchanged glances. It was Swift Eagle who answered. "Then you try to survive alone. Apache will not harm you, you have our word, but others," he shrugged. "Land grabbers, bandits, territorial government men who want Apache gone and will use any excuse. They will not be so generous." Margaret walked to the window beside Running Wolf, looking out at the vast expanse that was now supposedly hers. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. She thought of her dead husband Patrick, killed in a mining accident back in Colorado. She thought of the long journey here, sleeping in uncomfortable stagecoaches and cheap hotels, her money dwindling with each mile. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked without turning around. 3 days, Stone Bear said. "We will camp nearby, help you settle in, show you we are serious about our offer. Then you choose, or we leave you to face whatever comes alone." Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible circumstances settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. When she opened them again, the 3 Apache men were watching her with expressions that mixed hope, determination, and something that might have been respect. 3 days, she repeated. 3 days, Running Wolf confirmed. As night fell over the Arizona Territory, Margaret O'Sullivan began her strangest courtship, knowing that her choice would determine not just her survival, but the fate of 4 people caught between 2 worlds that seemed determined to destroy each other. Dawn broke over the desert with the subtle beauty of watercolors bleeding into canvas. Margaret had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting by the window with Patrick's old rifle across her lap, watching the small campfire that flickered in the distance where the 3 Apache men had made their camp. True to their word, they had given her space, but their presence was as tangible as the morning heat already beginning to rise from the sand. She had found coffee beans in one of the kitchen cupboards, stale but serviceable, and was brewing a pot when she heard the soft knock at her door. Margaret hesitated, then opened it to find Swift Eagle standing on her porch with a string of fresh fish and a shy smile. "Running Wolf caught these at dawn," he said, offering them to her. "Thought you might be hungry." Margaret accepted the fish, noting the skill with which they'd been cleaned and prepared. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." "May I?" Swift Eagle gestured toward the kitchen. "I can cook them properly, Apache way with desert herbs." Despite every instinct screaming caution, Margaret stepped aside. Swift Eagle moved through her kitchen with surprising familiarity, gathering kindling for the stove with efficient movements. As he worked, he spoke in his careful English. "You are wondering about us," he said, not looking up from the fish he was seasoning with plants he'd pulled from his pouch. "Why 3 warriors would make such offer to white woman?" "The thought had occurred to me," Margaret admitted, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Swift Eagle glanced up, his dark eyes serious. "My grandmother was taken by white soldiers when she was a young girl, forced to live in their world, learn their ways. When she finally returned to us, she brought knowledge that saved many lives during the drought years. She taught us that survival sometimes means—" He paused, searching for the words. "Joining with the thing that threatens you." Margaret sank into a chair at the table where she'd first encountered the 3 men. "And you see me as a threat?" "Not you," Swift Eagle said, turning the fish expertly in the pan. The aroma filled the small kitchen. "But what you represent? White settlement? Government papers? Law that says Apache have no right to land we've hunted for generations. Better to have white wife who holds deed than fight soldiers who come to remove us." "And the others? Stone Bear and Running Wolf? They feel the same way." Swift Eagle's expression grew complicated. "Each has his own reasons. Stone Bear," he set down his cooking utensil and looked directly at her. "Stone Bear lost wife and child to cavalry raid 2 years ago. He has been angry since then. Choosing white woman as wife, it would be healing for him, or revenge. I am not sure which." Margaret felt a chill despite the warming kitchen. "And Running Wolf?" "Running Wolf is different. He was educated at mission school when he was boy before he rejected white ways and returned to the people. He speaks your language better than he pretends, knows your customs. He thinks Apache and white can truly live in peace if right people show the way." The fish sizzled as Swift Eagle plated them with practiced care. He set one in front of Margaret, the meat perfectly cooked and fragrant with unfamiliar but pleasant herbs. "And you?" Margaret asked, tasting the fish. It was delicious. "What are your reasons?" Swift Eagle sat across from her, but didn't immediately eat. "I am caught between," he said finally. "Too young to remember the old ways clearly, too Apache to ever belong in white world. You are like me, I think. Irish woman in America, not fully belonging to either place." Margaret paused mid-bite. There was something unsettling about how clearly he saw her. "You know more about me than just my name." "Stagecoach driver talks too much when he drinks," Swift Eagle admitted with a slight smile. "Said you lost husband in mining accident, spent last of your money on this place because you had nowhere else to go." Said you worked in laundry before that, and before that cleaned houses for rich white families who treated you like you were invisible. Heat rose in Margaret's cheeks. My business is my own. Yes, Swift Eagle agreed, but loneliness is something I understand. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Margaret heard horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Stone Bear and Running Wolf riding toward the house, their horses moving at an easy lope across the desert floor. Time for you to know us better, Swift Eagle said, rising from the table. Each day one of us will work with you, show you what life would be like. Today is Stone Bear's day. Margaret's stomach tightened. And if I don't like what I see, then you make your choice knowing truth, Swift Eagle replied simply. Stone Bear entered without knocking, his presence immediately dominating the small space. Up close, Margaret could see that his scars weren't just from battle. Some were deliberate, ritual markings that spoke of grief and loss. His dark eyes swept over the breakfast dishes before settling on her face. You are weak, he said without preamble. City soft. Desert will kill you before winter comes. Margaret's Irish temper flared. And good morning to you too. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Stone Bear's harsh features. Good. Anger will keep you alive longer than politeness. Come, we work. He led her outside into the growing heat, where Running Wolf waited with a third horse, a gentle-looking mare with intelligent eyes. Stone Bear helped Margaret mount, his hands impersonal but steady, then swung onto his own horse with fluid grace. First lesson, Stone Bear said as they rode toward the broken sections of fence. This land looks empty, but it watches always. Apache know this. White men think they can force desert to be like green places they remember. They die stupid deaths. For the next several hours, Stone Bear taught Margaret the harsh realities of survival in the Arizona Territory. He showed her which plants stored water, which animals indicated the presence of natural springs, how to read the signs that warned of flash floods in the arroyos. His teaching style was brusque, demanding, but thorough. Why are you helping me? Margaret asked as they worked to repair a section of fence in the blazing noon sun. If you lost your family to people like me, why not just take the land? Stone Bear straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. For a long moment he stared out at the endless desert. Because taking is what they did to my wife and daughter, he said finally. I will not become them, even for justice. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Not attraction exactly, but a recognition of the man's fundamental honor despite his harsh exterior. Tonight Running Wolf will cook for you, Stone Bear continued, returning to his work. Tomorrow you see what life with each of us would be. Then you choose, and we all live with what comes after. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Margaret realized that each of these men offered her a different kind of survival. Swift Eagle offered understanding and companionship. Stone Bear offered strength and protection, tempered by loss. Tomorrow she would discover what Running Wolf had to offer. But first, she had to survive whatever test this proud, wounded warrior still had in store for her. The second morning brought with it a dust storm that turned the world into a swirling brown nightmare. Margaret woke to the sound of sand pelting her windows and wind howling through the gaps in the adobe walls like the voices of angry spirits. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found Running Wolf calmly grinding cornmeal with a stone metate he must have brought from their camp. Storm will pass by midday, he said without looking up, his English more polished than his companions. Good day to stay inside, learn different lessons. Margaret poured herself coffee from the pot he'd already prepared. Somehow he'd managed to make it taste better than anything she'd brewed in years. What kind of lessons? Running Wolf set aside his grinding and faced her fully. In the dim light filtered through dust-laden air, she could see the intelligence that Swift Eagle had mentioned, but also something else. A depth of knowledge that seemed almost spiritual in nature. You know nothing of Apache ways, he said, not unkindly. If you choose one of us, you choose to live between two worlds. Better to understand both. He had transformed her small kitchen into something resembling a classroom. Spread across the table were various plants, stones, and what appeared to be medicinal preparations. Running Wolf began with the plants, teaching her their names in both English and Apache, explaining their uses. This is Osha root, he said, holding up a gnarled aromatic root. Good for altitude sickness, breathing troubles. White doctors don't know it, but Apache have used it for centuries. And this, he showed her dried leaves, desert sage, not just for ceremony. Also stops bleeding, fights infection. Margaret found herself genuinely fascinated. You're a medicine man. My father was medicine man. I was trained to follow him, but Running Wolf's expression grew troubled. Mission school taught me that Apache ways were savage superstition. Took years to learn that both ways have wisdom, both have blindness. As the storm raged outside, Running Wolf shared stories of healing, of the delicate balance between the spiritual and practical aspects of Apache medicine. He showed Margaret how to prepare poultices, how to read the signs of illness in a person's eyes and skin, how to use ceremony to calm fear and promote healing. "Your husband," he said during a lull in the conversation. "How did he die?" Margaret's hands stilled on the herbs she'd been sorting. "Cave-in at the copper mine. Took them 2 days to dig him out. He was broken inside. Internal injuries. The company doctor said there was nothing to be done." Running Wolf nodded gravely. "White medicine is good for some things, surgery, setting bones, but it knows little of spirit, of the connections between body and soul. Apache way says grief can kill as surely as bullet. You carry your husband's death inside you like poison." Margaret looked up sharply. "I'm managing fine." "Are you?" Running Wolf's dark eyes were gentle but penetrating. "You bought this place with last money you had, came to desert where you could die alone rather than live with your pain among people who knew you. That is not managing. That is slow dying." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. Margaret stood abruptly and walked to the window, watching the sand swirl in violent eddies outside. "And you think marrying one of you would cure me?" "Not cure," Running Wolf said, rising and moving to stand behind her, "but maybe teach you that surviving and living are different things." They spent the rest of the morning in conversation that ranged from Apache creation stories to the practical politics of territorial government. Margaret discovered that Running Wolf understood the white world's legal system better than most whites, and had been quietly helping his people navigate the increasingly complex web of treaties and broken promises that defined Apache-American relations. "You could have been a lawyer," she said as they shared a lunch of corn cakes and dried meat. "With your education, your understanding of both cultures." Running Wolf smiled sadly. "White world would never accept Apache lawyer." "And Apache world," he shrugged. "They need warriors and medicine men more than they need men who speak government words. So you're caught in between, like Swift Eagle said he was." "We are all caught in between," Running Wolf replied. "You, me, Stone Bear, Swift Eagle. The old ways are dying, but new ways are not yet born. Question is, do we help birth something new or do we die with what is passing?" The storm began to clear as afternoon approached, and Running Wolf led Margaret outside to show her the desert as it revealed itself after the sand had settled. The clarity of the air was startling. Mountains that had been invisible the day before now stood sharp against the horizon, and the colors of the landscape seemed to glow with inner light. "Apache believe that after great storms, spirits walk the earth more freely," Running Wolf explained as they walked among the ocotillo and palo verde trees near the house. "Time when healing is possible, when what was broken can be made whole again." Margaret felt something loosening in her chest, a tightness she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. "Is that why you chose today to share your medicine?" "Perhaps," Running Wolf said, stopping beside a small shrine he'd constructed from stones and feathers while she wasn't looking. "Or perhaps today chose us." As they walked back toward the house in the golden light of late afternoon, Margaret found herself seeing the landscape differently. Where before she'd seen only harsh emptiness, now she noticed the subtle signs of life that Running Wolf had taught her to recognize. The tracks of javelinas near the water tank, the burrows of ground squirrels beneath the mesquite, the delicate wildflowers that bloomed in sheltered spots despite the desert's apparent hostility to life. "Tomorrow is Swift Eagle's day," Running Wolf said as they reached the porch. "He will show you different path, not healing of body or spirit, but healing between peoples." Margaret turned to face him, this quiet man who had shown her depths of knowledge she hadn't expected. "And after tomorrow, after I've seen all three paths," Running Wolf's expression grew serious. "After tomorrow you choose, and we all discover what kind of future we have courage to build." That evening, as Margaret lay in her bed listening to the coyotes sing their ancient songs to the desert stars, she realized that her choice was becoming more complex than simple survival. Each of these men offered not just protection and partnership, but a different way of understanding what it meant to be human in a world where the old certainties were crumbling. Stone Bear offered strength forged in loss. Running Wolf offered wisdom that bridged worlds. Tomorrow she would learn what Swift Eagle's path might hold, and then she would have to decide which future she was brave enough to embrace. The third morning dawned crystal clear, the air so clean and sharp It seemed to cut through Margaret's lungs with each breath. She found Swift Eagle waiting on her porch with 2 horses and a pack loaded with supplies, his young face bright with anticipation. "Today we ride to town," he announced. "You need to see how your choice affects more than just us 4. Margaret hesitated, remembering her few encounters with the townspeople of Copper Springs when she'd first arrived. The stares, the whispered comments about the Irish widow buying the cursed ranch. "I'm not sure that's wise." "Wisdom sometimes requires courage," Swift Eagle replied, offering her the reins to the gentler mare. "Besides, there are people you should meet before you decide." The ride to Copper Springs took 2 hours across terrain that shifted from desert scrub to rolling grassland as they approached the settlement. Swift Eagle proved to be an engaging companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories that revealed his deep knowledge of the local area. Unlike his 2 companions, he seemed genuinely comfortable moving between Apache and white worlds. "You speak English better than you let on at first," Margaret observed, as they crested a hill that revealed the dusty main street of Copper Springs below. Swift Eagle grinned. "Sometimes it is better to let people think you know less than you do. They say more interesting things when they believe you cannot understand." The town was larger than Margaret had expected. Perhaps 300 souls clustered around a main street that boasted a general store, saloon, hotel, and church. What surprised her was the diversity of faces she saw. Mexican vaqueros, Chinese railroad workers, Negro freedmen seeking opportunity in the territories, and yes, several Apache who moved freely among the other residents. "Not what you expected?" Swift Eagle asked, noting her surprise. "I thought, after what Stone Bear said about cavalry raids and violence..." "Violence exists," Swift Eagle said seriously as they tied their horses outside the general store, "but so does cooperation. Some places, some people, understand that survival requires learning to live together." Their first stop was the general store, where Margaret was amazed to be greeted warmly by the proprietor, a stout German immigrant named Klaus Weber. Even more surprising was his easy familiarity with Swift Eagle. "Guten Tag, my friend," Klaus called out in accented English. "You bring the new ranch owner to meet civilized people, yeah?" "Margaret O'Sullivan, this is Klaus Weber." Swift Eagle made the introduction smoothly. "Klaus has been in territory almost as long as Apache. He understands that business is business, regardless of who brings the money." Klaus nodded vigorously. "Swift Eagle here, he brings me best furs, most beautiful beadwork. His sister makes jewelry that ladies from back east pay top dollar for. Smart business, working together instead of fighting." As Klaus showed Margaret around his surprisingly well-stocked store, Swift Eagle explained his vision for the future. "Apache have skills, knowledge, goods that whites want. Whites have tools, materials, connections to markets that Apache need. But fear keeps people from seeing opportunities." Their next stop was even more eye-opening. Swift Eagle led her to a small adobe building that served as an informal meeting place and trading post. Inside, Margaret found herself in what could only be described as a cultural melting pot. Apache women teaching Mexican children to weave baskets, while a grizzled white prospector shared mining techniques with young Apache men. "This is what I want to build," Swift Eagle said quietly as they watched the interactions. "Not just between you and me, but between our peoples. Your ranch could be bridge, place where different worlds meet safely." An elderly Apache woman approached them, her weathered face creased with smile lines. She spoke rapidly in Apache to Swift Eagle, then turned expectant eyes to Margaret. "This is my grandmother, Elena," Swift Eagle translated. "She says you have kind eyes but sad spirit. She wants to know if you are ready to stop looking backward and start looking forward." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Your grandmother is very perceptive." Eleanor spoke again, and Swift Eagle's expression grew more serious as he translated. "She says the spirits have shown her visions of what could be, Apache and white children playing together, learning from both traditions, but also visions of more blood, more loss if people cannot find courage to change." The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge. As they were preparing to leave town, a group of rough-looking men emerged from the saloon. Margaret recognized the type immediately: drifters, troublemakers, the kind of men who thrived on conflict and saw opportunity in other people's fear. "Well, looky here," the leader, a tall man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes, called out. "If it ain't the squaw lover and his new white woman." Swift Eagle's hand moved almost imperceptibly to the knife at his belt, but his voice remained calm. "Afternoon, Carson. Just showing Mrs. O'Sullivan around town." "Mrs. O'Sullivan," Carson repeated mockingly. That'd be the crazy Irish woman who bought the cursed ranch, right? Heard tell she's got herself some Apache house guests. Margaret stepped forward, her Irish temper rising. My business is my own, sir. Carson's smile was ugly. Your business becomes everyone's business when you're harboring hostiles, lady. Some folks think the territorial government needs to know about Apache operating freely on deeded land. Apache who live peacefully and trade legally, Swift Eagle said, his voice still controlled but with an edge now. Apache who should be on reservation where they belong, Carson shot back, along with any white women fool enough to consort with savages. The confrontation might have escalated, but Klaus Weber emerged from his store with a shotgun cradled casually in his arms. Carson, he said conversationally, you and your friends, you are no longer welcome in my store. Why don't you find someplace else to drink your troubles away, yeah? Several other townspeople had emerged from shops and houses, and Margaret was surprised to see that most seemed to stand with Klaus rather than with Carson's group. After a tense moment, Carson spat in the dust and led his men away. You see, Swift Eagle said as they mounted their horses for the ride home, change is possible, but it requires people willing to stand up, take risks, build something new. As they rode back across the desert in the gathering twilight, Margaret found herself thinking about Elena's words. Was she ready to stop looking backward? The past 3 days had shown her possibilities she'd never imagined, not just for survival, but for genuine partnership, maybe even happiness. What happens if I choose none of you? She asked as they neared the ranch. Swift Eagle was quiet for a long moment. Then we respect your choice and leave, he said finally. But Margaret, he turned to look at her directly, sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. That night, Margaret sat on her porch watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Tomorrow she would have to choose, and she realized that her decision would affect far more than just her own future. She was choosing between different visions of what life in the Arizona Territory could become. Stone Bear offered protection and strength, born of loss. Running Wolf offered healing and wisdom that bridged worlds. Swift Eagle offered hope and the possibility of building something entirely new. Each path held promise. Each path held danger, and time was running out to decide which future she was brave enough to help create. The fourth dawn came with an unwelcome sound, the thunder of approaching horses and the shouts of armed men. Margaret woke to find Swift Eagle at her window, his face grim in the pale morning light. Carson and his men, he said tersely, at least a dozen riders heavily armed. They're coming for us. Margaret's heart hammered as she quickly dressed. Outside, she could see Stone Bear and Running Wolf taking defensive positions around the ranch house, their movements coordinated and purposeful. These were warriors who had faced such threats before. Why now? Margaret asked, checking the loads in Patrick's old rifle. Because today you choose, Stone Bear replied as he entered the house. They hoped to force decision by eliminating options. The riders came into view across the desert, dust rising behind them like a brown thundercloud. Carson led them, and Margaret could see the glint of weapons in the morning sun. They spread out in a loose semicircle as they approached, clearly intending to surround the ranch house. Mrs. O'Sullivan, Carson called out when they were within shouting distance. So you've got one chance to walk away clean. Send out them Apache and come with us, and nobody has to get hurt. Margaret stepped onto her porch, the 3 Apache men flanking her. This is my land, she called back, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. You have no right to be here. Lady, you're harboring hostiles on territorial land, Carson replied. That makes you a criminal in the eyes of the law. Whose law? Swift Eagle stepped forward. We have committed no crimes. We have harmed no one. The crime of being Apache is enough, one of Carson's men shouted. Should have stayed on the reservation where you belong. Running Wolf spoke quietly, without taking his eyes off the surrounding men. Margaret, whatever you choose today, choose knowing that this is what we face every day. Violence from men who see Apache as less than human. Margaret felt something crystallize inside her. Not just anger, but a clarity she hadn't experienced since Patrick's death. These men had come to her land, threatened people under her protection, tried to force her into compliance through fear. It was everything she'd fled from in the mining camps, the powerlessness that had defined too much of her life. I've made my choice, she said loudly enough for Carson to hear. Smart woman, Carson called back. Send 'em out and... I choose to fight, Margaret continued, raising Patrick's rifle. This is my land. These are my guests, and you can all go to hell. The silence that followed was broken by Stone Bear's low chuckle. Good choice, white woman. The standoff might have continued, but Running Wolf spotted additional riders approaching from the east. "More coming," he reported. Margaret's heart sank until she recognized the lead rider, Klaus Weber, accompanied by perhaps 20 townspeople from Copper Springs, including several Apache and Mexican vaqueros. Eleanor, Swift Eagle's grandmother, rode beside Klaus with a dignity that would have suited a queen. "Carson," Klaus shouted as his group took positions behind the attackers. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Time to go home, yeah?" Carson wheeled his horse around, clearly not having expected this development. "This ain't your fight, Weber." "Is my fight when bullies threaten my customers," Klaus replied calmly. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, she buys supplies from me. Swift Eagle, he brings me good business. You bring only trouble." Elena guided her horse forward and spoke in rapid Apache. Swift Eagle translated, his voice carrying a mix of amusement and respect. "My grandmother says Carson should be careful. She has powerful medicine for dealing with men who attack women and disturb the peace." The confrontation ended not with violence, but with Carson's gradual realization that he was vastly outnumbered by people who weren't going to back down. After several tense minutes, he led his men away, but not before spitting one final curse. "This ain't over." As the dust settled and the townspeople began to disperse with friendly waves and promises to visit soon, Margaret found herself alone with the 3 Apache men who had offered to change her life. "So," Stone Bear said, his scarred face wearing what might have been a smile, "you choose to fight, but you still must choose which of us fights beside you." Margaret looked at each of them in turn. Stone Bear, whose strength had been forged in loss, but who had never let pain turn him cruel. Running Wolf, whose wisdom bridged worlds and whose healing touch could mend more than just physical wounds. Swift Eagle, whose vision of the future offered hope for something entirely new. "I've spent the last 3 days learning about each of you," she said slowly. "Your strengths, your dreams, your different ways of seeing the world. And I realize that each of you has something precious to offer." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to propose. "But I've also learned something about myself. I'm tired of other people making choices for me. My family choosing my husband, circumstances choosing my poverty, fear choosing my isolation. For the first time in my life, I want to make a choice based not on what I need to survive, but on what I want to build." The 3 men waited, their faces carefully neutral. "Running Wolf," Margaret continued, "you've shown me that my grief doesn't have to define me, that healing is possible. Swift Eagle, you've shown me that the future can be different from the past, that bridges can be built between different worlds. Stone Bear, you've shown me that strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about surviving the hurt and remaining honorable." She took a deep breath. "I choose Swift Eagle." Stone Bear nodded gravely, showing no sign of disappointment. "He is good choice. He will build future worth living in." Running Wolf placed a gentle hand on Swift Eagle's shoulder. "You have my blessing, brother, and my promise to help you both in whatever comes." Swift Eagle looked stunned, as if he hadn't dared hope for this outcome. "Margaret, are you certain? You understand what this means? The challenges we'll face?" Margaret smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I understand that nothing worthwhile is ever easy. I understand that we'll face people like Carson again, and that some will never accept what we're trying to build. But I also understand that sometimes the only way to create the world you want to live in is to take the risk of building it yourself." That evening, as the sun set over the Arizona territory, Margaret O'Sullivan and Swift Eagle were married in a ceremony that blended Irish, Apache, and territorial traditions. Klaus Weber served as witness alongside Elena, while Stone Bear and Running Wolf stood as guardians of the union. The wedding feast was simple but joyful, with townspeople from Copper Springs mingling with Apache families in a celebration that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. As Margaret danced with her new husband under the desert stars, she realized that she had chosen more than just a partner. She had chosen to believe in the possibility of a future where different peoples could not just coexist, but thrive together. The ranch that had cost her $12 became the foundation for something far more valuable, a community where Irish determination, Apache wisdom, and frontier courage combined to create something entirely new. Margaret O'Sullivan had bought land with her last $12, but she had paid for her future with something far more precious, the courage to hope again. And in the years that followed, as their ranch became a meeting place for people of all backgrounds, as their children grew up speaking 3 languages and learning from multiple traditions, Margaret never regretted the choice she made that dawn when she decided to fight for the life she wanted, rather than simply accept the life she'd been given.